So we're just explaining, Roz was explaining about the duality of being an artist.
Well, before even talking about duality being an artist, I guess we can just step back. There's a duality about being human, right? There's a duality in being a person, right? In one of my poems, I talk about how we're all like walking contradictions, and that everything that we attach ourselves to comes with an idea that either we have the strength to affect this or we don't, but we don't quite know yet. And it's that gray area where I think art comes from. I think art comes from that gray area when you're trying to figure out your place in the world,
Right.
when you're trying to make sense of the good and the bad, when you're trying to make sense of the pain, the love, the anguish, and all those other human emotions that we deal with. And somewhere in the intersection of all that, when someone decides that they want to articulate or express all those emotions and feelings, that's where you get your art from, whether it's through taking a photo or a video or writing a poem or painting something. I think that's where that gray area is where the art comes from. But we were talking about the psychology of an artist, and I think there's a duality even in the psychology of being an artist. Just the feeling that I have a responsibility with my art, but at the same time, my art comes from a very personal place. And I'm speaking for myself, and I'm sure I'm speaking for many other artists. We were saying before about how your art comes from a very personal place. It's a personal relationship.
Right.
It's you and the canvas, or you and the material, or you and whatever, and then you introduce it to the world, and then suddenly the world wants to share in that relationship with you and your art. And it can be quite awkward for certain artists who are not accustomed to having that type of social responsibility or having that sort of attention as a person, right? Because I think we often think that when we're talking about an artist, we forget that they're people. We forget that they come with anxieties, and they come with fears, and they come with character traits that you may not exactly expect of a person who you would consider an artist, right? So it's an awkward and strange place to be in, but I think that's why the art is always so pure, because it's coming from a place of vulnerability.
Right. And you answered like my next question kind of. I was going to ask about the spiritual component. How does art interact with your spiritual understanding, your place of spirituality?
Hmm. Well, with speaking of spirituality, I have to give recognition to the Most High, and to the fact that I am a Rasta, God-fearing Rastafari is, and as a Rasta, everything that I do, it has a spiritual connection or component to it. Everything that I do, I like to think that in everything that I touch, and everything that I speak, and everything that I come in contact with, I bring a piece of my soul with me to it.
Wow.
And a piece of my soul is Rastafari. That's how I define and create my definition of self. So from that point of view, my spirituality and my beliefs come with me everywhere I go. As an artist, there's always and especially as a spoken word poet, it's always a very interesting moment when you write this poem, and then you look back at it and you realize that this poem is totally created. It's a creative reflection of who you are, in your most vulnerable sense. I look back at a lot of poems that I write, and I make sure that what I'm writing really comes from the life I've lived, or the life that I've seen. And what happens is you become reintroduced to yourself in a very, very new way. And it's a really, I guess you can call it a very spiritual experience. You call it a very spiritual experience when you have a poem that the world seems to connect to, but you wrote it from a very personal and specific and vulnerable place within yourself. Right? That's a very spiritual encounter. I think anytime you have an opportunity to be introduced to yourself by something that you've created is always a spiritual experience, and it's a humbling experience. You get the opportunity to learn things about yourself that you didn't know, even though the words that you're writing all come from conscious experience that you've lived through, right? But once you go back and you read what you've written, or you look at what you've painted, you get to see a perspective of it that maybe you didn't know you put in there. Or you get the opportunity to look at yourself from the point of view of an audience member, and you have the opportunity to find things out about yourself that you maybe didn't know you slipped in your poem. Or you may find emotions in your poem after you've recited or after you've read it that maybe you didn't know was there. And I think whenever you have the opportunity to meet yourself in such an open, pure, and vulnerable way, it has to be a spiritual experience, because there's nothing else there.
That's good stuff. I agree. It's the artist is able to almost heal themselves if they
Yes.
really go in
Yes.
and release themselves. It's
Yes.
like the passion that you put out, release, it really comes back to you. But you can never measure in what form. You just have to be obedient to whatever is within.
Yes.
And
Yes.
continue.
Yes. You have to be obedient to what you do. I can give a great example of that. Yesterday, I came to an open mic here in the city, one of our great open mics that happen regularly right here downtown, and I've told other friends of mine who are beginning to dabble into the art this. I tell them this all the time, and it's because I've begun to realize it myself. You know, art always comes from, or oftentimes comes from, a very perplexing place. It always comes from a place that has a whole variety of emotions and sentiments attached to it. Some good, some bad. You know, but what I've come to realize is, once I've put that piece into the universe, once I've performed that
Yes.
poem, once I've put it out there, and the audience responds to you in a certain way, you feel a sense of validation.
Yes.
You know, you get this sense of, okay, whatever maybe terrible things that have happened to me that have created this poem, I've now shared, and because the world has embraced me through this poem, now all the things that created, all the material, all the experiences that created this poem are now validated. You know, with those hand claps that you get, or those shits that you get, or those hugs, or that love, that vibe, that energy that you get, suddenly you get this feeling that we get this feeling that washes over you that says, well, whatever experience that brought me to this poem, I now feel validated by it. You know, there was a specific topic for the open mic that I went to last night, and I had the poem ready for it. It was a perfect topic. The topic was gentrification, and I had the perfect poem for it, a poem that I wrote maybe about a year and a half ago called Gentrified Lines, and I wanted to get it off my chest. But on my way there, I was reflecting on my day, and I realized that I'd had quite a long day. So by the time I got there, I realized that wasn't the poem that I wanted to share.
Wow. I love that. That's good.
That wasn't the poem that I wanted to share, because the piece that I wanted to share was more connected to what I'd been feeling and going through that day. You know, so when you're talking about staying true, remaining true to the art that's within you, I think that's a great example of that. You have to give self. You have to give self. And when the world looks at you as an artist, sometimes they can demand certain expectations of you. But I think they'll appreciate you and love you more as an artist if whatever you give them is always coming from a place of honesty, is always coming from a place of genuine experience, and is always true to who you are in that moment at that time.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Remember, artists, to yourself.
To yourself.
Whatever's going on in here, give it out.
Because as an artist, your very first responsibility is to yourself. You know, whether you are a photographer, a poet, an architect, someone who designs this garden, you know, the idea, that very first idea, that inspiration, is between you and the art, right? Or rather, before the world knows that Ras Heru is a poet, Ras Heru knows it first, right? Before the world knows that you're whatever it is that you assign yourself to, whatever it is that you attach yourself to, you know it before the world does. So your first responsibility is to self in that sense, right? Because when I wrote my first poem, whenever that was, I wasn't writing it for the world. When I wrote that, you know, first poem, I was writing it because there was something in me that I needed to deal with, and my art was the way that I was supposed to deal with it. And as you begin to make yourself known and become celebrated for what you do, you have to remember why you do it. You have to remember the very first function and responsibility and duty you had to your art, and the responsibilities and duties that art had to you. And you have to keep that channel pure.
Well, that's good stuff. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely.
How do you see not only your art, but how do you see artists changing Newark? We were talking earlier about the artistic movement and the movement, the strong vibe that we have. Yeah. But how do you see this move impacting the very... I know the mayor talks about that he sees culture equivalent to science, and we understand that.
Absolutely.
But what's your take on that?
I think stepping outside of the context of just Newark. I remember hearing this in a class I had in high school, and it's stuck with me ever since. Whenever you want to take a look at the history of a people, right? Whenever you want to get an idea, a first-handed look at the culture of a people, the day-to-day lives of any people, you don't look to the politicians, you don't look to the newspapers. You don't look to those things. You look to the arts. You know, if you really want to understand a place and time and a society and a culture and a community, you look at what the artists are doing, right? So in that sense, the artists have a responsibility of cataloging what's happening around them through their work, and you do that simply by cataloging what's happening to you, right? Because if you're a member of that culture, then anything that you're talking about in regards to yourself is a conversation about that culture you're a part of, is a conversation about that community, right? So the two of us sitting here, building, having this conversation we're having, is an exercise in culture. You know, it is an exercise in what's happening in the culture because we're a part of it, right? So artists being attached to whatever community or culture they're a part of, just by virtue of them carrying out their own functionality, they have a role to play, and they are playing that role. Just by them being the artists that they are making an impression on the culture that's around them. So I think a lot, bringing it back to Newark, I think a lot of the development, however you define that word, that's happening around, isn't so much, you know, structural development and politics and all these other things, but it's about a development and a resurgence
I agree
in
with
people,
that. Right.
in people, you know, in vibration and culture, and the way you look at the world and the way you interact with your neighbors. You know, I think that's where the real development is happening. You know, the fact that we're now in a place where you and I can sit down and have this conversation right here in Military Park and talk about all the beautiful things that's happening around the city. That's the real development.
And here, and we're not talking about anything negative.
No.
And it doesn't mean that we're not negating that bad things that does not happen.
And it doesn't mean we're not acknowledging that those things don't happen.
Right. But what we're saying is that there's an energy, there's a vibe, and this creative vibe, goes out, and it really transformed the city. When you see this YouTube, and you look at our background, look where we're sitting, yeah, we're talking about transforming where we live, so that we can be the artists that we know that we should be, and we can be who we know we should be from in here.
Yeah.
Whether you call that innate gift, spirit, whether it's your creator, whether it's universe, whether it's God, this is true. This is where we are, and this is what we want to just share with you.
You know, growing up here in the city, you know, catching the buses back and forth to school. I remember, you know, being down here, the 24, the 25, the 13. You know, as a kid,
Son of Newark, y'all.
Yeah, a true son of Newark, a true child of the city. You know, catching the bus, walking back and forth down here as a kid with my mom, and then as I got older, you know, by myself. And now I'm sitting here in the park talking about my contribution to the city.
Right.
You know, that's development.
That's what's up.
You know, that's development. You know, this interview we're having right now is a contribution to the city.
Right.
That's development. You know, you couldn't ask for more. Excuse me.
This goes out to the world.
Yes.
So this is Son of Newark, now talking to the world.
Yes. Yes.
Catching the 24 bus some years ago, but now speaking to the world.
And as far as yesterday, I'm still catching the buses here and now and then. You know,
well, that's fine.
I drive, but I like to soak up the city and just breathe the air of the city whenever I get the
I feel
opportunity
you that.
to. You know,
I like to stay on the buses too.
You know,
because you stay in touch with people.
We stay in touch with people. You know, it shows acknowledgement and appreciation for the blessings that we have. You know, the fact that we're able to, you know, we're able-bodied people who have the ability to go from here to there. And it's just an appreciation. You know, you have to walk the city if you want to be acknowledged by the city in any way, shape, or form.
I hear a poem there. No.
You know, you have to acknowledge the city. You have to be a part of it.
All right, teacher.
You know?
Go ahead.
You have to you have to be a part of it. As a matter of fact, when I received your message yesterday.
Yeah.
I was standing, like, right there.
Oh, you were near the park?
Yes, I was standing right there. I was coming from the open mic, and I was getting on the bus. I just sat on the bus. My phone had went off. I opened it up, and it was you. You know, so that's the universe. That's the universe. And now a couple hours later, we're sitting right here. You know, that's the universe. So you have to be a part of it in order to have things happen for you, or with you, in the community. You know, you have to be present. You have to be present. I think that's the point. You have to be present.
That's the key word.
You have to be present.
I couldn't have said it better. You want to leave the audience with a little piece of something?
Sure.
Something? All
sure.
Right, it's
I
your
can
show.
give a little something.
It's your show.
Here we go.
Son of Newark. Ras Heru. Son of Newark.
My block was named after a slave master. I've lived and hurt here for years, and yet my tears fall to the ground with a hopelessness synonymous to the sound of nails piercing innocent hands. As I stand here, I hold the weight and hear the whisper of 1,000 dead poets with stories like mine, and in time were all forgotten, their words too rotten with honesty for the anthologies that told them no. As I laugh, I grow cold, recalling Langston, his verse, the darker brother, and I wonder, what part of me made me the dark matter that never mattered? And so I groomed myself a son of sun people. My pen writing me out of pinstripes and into Adinkra symbols. Panthers screaming the slogans etched into my forearms, their paws lying in my chest, charging me of jargons, my body. My body now a mausoleum written in hope and hieroglyphs, so the eulogy reads of bleak, beautiful blackness. Master may own the block, but he don't own me. I baptize in this blackness, this hereditary tar, and if I swim out too far and I drown beneath the weight of the chains, know that these were the chains I chose and not those hanging from the street signs. Bless. Peace and love. Thank you.
Awesome.